The aroma of coffee wafted through the early morning kitchen. Linda Wilson had risen at 5:30 a.m. to her alarm clock, as was her habit, taken her shower, and begun her preparations for work. Tulips were beginning to bloom in the garden, and the maple trees were sprouting fresh green buds. Her colonial-style house was bathed in the gentle morning light. Having finished her daily morning prayers, Linda gazed out through the glass doors into the garden. As someone who never missed Sunday service at First Presbyterian Church, this quiet time of prayer was her spiritual anchor for the day. "Amy, time to wake up," Linda called out gently to her 10-year-old daughter as she climbed the stairs. Opening Amy's bedroom door, she found her daughter sleeping peacefully, surrounded by stuffed animals. The soft spring light streaming through the window illuminated her chestnut hair. On the wall hung a certificate proudly displaying her victory in last week's spelling contest. Linda gently shook her daughter's shoulder. "Good morning, young lady," she said softly. Amy let out a small groan as she slowly opened her eyes. "Good morning, Mom." Back in the kitchen, Linda opened her work laptop while preparing Amy's breakfast, a bagel with cream cheese. In her 15 years as head accountant at WBC Accounting, she had never missed an important deadline. Her meticulous nature was her strength, both at work and at home. Today, as always, her desk displayed perfectly organized documents, with post-it notes marking detailed schedules. The distant sound of the Metro North train's engine could be heard. The commuter train to Stamford was part of the morning landscape in this town. Already, joggers could be seen enjoying their morning exercise. Cars heading to Whole Foods Market had begun to pass by. As she heard Amy's footsteps coming down the stairs, Linda continued her final review of the quarterly report. Her fingers moved confidently over the Excel cells, never hesitating. She worked efficiently while occasionally casting gentle glances to check on her daughter. "Isn't Dad joining us for breakfast today?" Amy asked in a slightly forlorn voice as she sat at the table. In her eyes seemed to float memories of the times when she used to play with her father every morning. Linda paused at her daughter's question and let out a deep sigh. 12 years of marriage with Michael. They had met when he visited WBC Accounting as a real estate agent. Back then, as a rookie salesman at Prime Realty, he had given off an impression of intelligence and sincerity. After being invited to dinner during their second business meeting, they were married 6 months later. The honeymoon in Cape Cod, Amy's birth, Thanksgiving family gatherings, the memories were endless. But recently, Michael had changed. Since his promotion to sales director, his hours at home had gradually decreased, and weekend work had increased. Family time had diminished drastically, and he had stopped showing up at Sunday church. His seat at their weekend pot roast dinners had increasingly been empty. "Dad's handling a big project," Linda answered, but she felt the hollowness in her own voice. Michael's explanations lacked credibility. Last night, too, he had returned home after 11 p.m. The faint perfume on his shirt collar wasn't his usual choice. His habit of unnecessarily hiding his phone screen had also become more noticeable lately. Linda stroked her daughter's hair while suppressing the anxiety in her heart. Her intuition, honed by years of accounting work, was telling her that something significant was about to change. But now she needed to focus on the work at hand. She turned her attention back to the laptop screen. Outside the window, the sun was rising over Greenwich, heralding the start of a new day. On Saturday afternoon, Linda was playing Scrabble with Amy in the living room, where pleasant spring sunlight streamed in. Her daughter had recently become completely absorbed in word games. On the table sat Amy's favorite lemonade and homemade cinnamon cookies. Family photos hanging on the wall captured once happy smiles. A peaceful afternoon was flowing through the house on this holiday. Beautiful 435 points. Amy declared proudly. Linda returned a smile, noting her daughter's intellectual growth. Mother and daughter were genuinely enjoying this quiet weekend moment. The aroma of barbecue wafted in from the neighbors, and children's laughter could be heard. It was a typical New England weekend scene. Through the window, Mrs. Johnson could be seen tending to her garden. As president of the First Presbyterian Church Women's Association, she always greeted neighbors with a warm smile. This everyday scene would soon stand in stark contrast to what was about to unfold. Suddenly, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. Michael, who was supposed to be working overtime, had made an unexpected return. When Linda looked up, her husband was accompanied by an unfamiliar young woman. In that instant, the atmosphere in the living room changed completely. The woman looked as if she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. Jimmy Choo heels, a Chanel tweed jacket, and an Hermes Birkin bag. The luxury brands she wore from head to toe were clearly beyond what a new employee at Prime Realty could afford. There was something unnatural about her too perfect appearance. Linda suddenly remembered a conversation from last week's accounting department meeting. There had been rumors about suspicious activity in the company's financial management system. But before she could pursue that thought further, the situation took a dramatic turn. "Daddy." Amy stood up happily. However, noticing Michael's cold expression, she froze in place. There was no trace of the usual kindness in her father's eyes. The smile disappeared from Amy's face as she looked up at her mother anxiously. "Amy, go to your room," Linda instinctively said, protecting her daughter. Her voice revealed a mother's instinct to shield her child from the scene about to unfold. Though confused, Amy sensed the gravity of the situation from her mother's tone and hesitantly climbed the stairs. Only the ticking of the Tiffany clock on the mantel could be heard with unusual clarity. Behind Michael, the unfamiliar woman wore a triumphant smile. "This is Jessica, my new fiancée," Michael said in an imperious tone. His voice held not a trace of its former gentleness. In 12 years of marriage, Linda had never heard such a cold voice from him. "Sign the divorce papers." Jessica Morrison maintained her smug smile. Though only 29, her demeanor carried a shrewdness beyond her years. Glossy black hair, perfect makeup, and a calculated expression. However, her eyes weren't smiling. Rather, there was a glimpse of wariness, as if trying to hide something. "I'm divorcing you to marry her." Michael roughly threw the divorce papers on the desk. The signature field already bore his elaborate handwriting. As the papers flew through the air, Linda's eyes caught a receipt sliding out from between the divorce documents. A receipt from a luxury jeweler. The amount written there was far beyond what Michael could afford on his salary. The air in the living room seemed to freeze for a moment. Outside, birds were chirping, and someone was mowing their lawn next door. The maple's new leaves swayed in the wind, and somewhere a church bell was ringing. These everyday sounds reached her ears with unusual clarity. Linda slowly stood up. With her observant eye, developed through 15 years of accounting work, she carefully studied Jessica. The perfect appearance wrapped in luxury brands. Yet there was something familiar about her presence. Especially the peculiar way she handled documents. Just like during that embezzlement case 3 years ago. At that moment, something clicked in Linda's mind. The embezzlement case at WBC Accounting. The mastermind who had dealt the company a severe blow with sophisticated methods was, if she remembered correctly. But she wasn't completely certain yet. She took a deep breath and straightened her back. Maintaining the composure she had developed through her accounting work, she quietly spoke. "Do you really know who she is?" With those words, the atmosphere in the room changed. Jessica's expression stiffened for a moment. Linda didn't miss this subtle change. Under her makeup, Jessica's face became slightly pale. Michael stood bewildered, at a loss for words at his wife's calm demeanor. Amy's presence could be felt from upstairs. She was probably sensing this unusual atmosphere from the top of the stairs. Occasional small sounds could be heard. No doubt she was worriedly trying to gauge what was happening downstairs. As a mother, Linda knew she had to resolve this situation. For her daughter's future. She strengthened her resolve. Eventually, she spoke again. "When you know who she really is, you'll." On the table, the Scrabble game remained as they had left it. The word beautiful lay there, ironically quiet. Linda discreetly activated the voice recorder on her smartphone. "What are you trying to say?" Michael's voice had risen slightly. Though his attitude was aggressive, there was also a hint of anxiety. Jessica casually readjusted her Birkin bag against her chest. The gesture betrayed a hint of panic, as if trying to hide something. "I can't say anything yet," Linda answered quietly. Her intuition, honed through her accounting work, was telling her of the gravity of what was unfolding before her. "But there's something you need to know." "Don't be ridiculous." Michael slammed the desk. The sound made Amy let out a small cry from upstairs. "I'm telling you to sign right now." Jessica's eyes narrowed slightly. "Michael, let's think about our new life together." Her voice was honey-sweet, but her eyes were cold and calculating. Linda stood up and went upstairs. Amy was crying at the top of the stairs. "Hey, could you go to Aunt Sarah's house next door?" Linda said, gently embracing her daughter. "Stay and play there until Mom comes to get you." Though Amy resisted, she noticed the severity in her mother's expression and nodded silently. "Is Dad okay?" Linda couldn't answer that question. Instead, she hugged her daughter tightly again. Returning to the living room, Linda picked up her smartphone. She called her colleague at WBC Accounting, Jennifer Morris. "Jenny, sorry but this is an emergency." She briefly explained the situation. On the other end of the line, she could hear Jennifer gasp. "Do you still have the files from the embezzlement case 3 years ago? Can you access the database?" Linda asked. Jennifer immediately promised to help. Michael approached aggressively. "What are you plotting?" But Linda calmly continued looking at her screen, carefully checking the old records Jennifer had sent. There were detailed records of the embezzlement case that had shaken WBC Accounting 3 years ago. $5 million had disappeared through sophisticated methods. The perpetrator had never been found and the statute of limitations was approaching. However, the security camera footage had captured a distinctive gesture of one person. A unique habit when handling documents. The exact same gesture as Jessica's now. Next, Linda accessed public information about Michael's company. Prime Realty's financial statements. There were subtle but unnatural movements in the numbers. To her professional accounting eye, these were signs of improper fund movements. You're doing such thorough research," Jessica said coldly. There was a hint of panic in her voice. "But the divorce is a done deal. Michael has chosen me." "Is that really so?" Linda quietly asked. "For a new employee at Prime Realty, you seem to have quite enough disposable income to carry around an Hermes Birkin." Jessica's expression tightened. Michael looked bewildered, glancing between the two women. "What are you talking about?" "Jessica is." "Michael, be quiet," Jessica cut him off sharply. In that moment, their power dynamic became clear. It was Jessica, not Michael, who held the real authority. Linda dialed another number on her smartphone. "Hello, this is Linda Wilson from WBC Accounting. I have an urgent matter to discuss regarding Prime Realty." At those words, the blood drained from Jessica's face. Linda was gathering evidence and getting closer to the truth. Jessica realized she was running out of escape routes, and Michael was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation he had been drawn into. Finally, Linda made an important decision. She would visit Michael's company next Monday. It was time to reveal all the truth and settle this distorted triangle. "Let's meet at Prime Realty headquarters on Monday," Linda announced quietly but firmly. "I'll tell you everything then." Jessica tried to object but lost her words in the face of Linda's confident gaze. Michael was finally beginning to realize he had made some terrible mistake. Monday morning, Prime Realty's headquarters building reflected the spring sunlight of Greenwich in its mirror-like exterior walls. A heavy atmosphere already hung in the 9th-floor conference room. The company executives had gathered, as if waiting for some major announcement. Michael Wilson stood by the window, staring outside. The events since the weekend felt like a nightmare. Next to him, Jessica sat nervously. Her Hermes Birkin bag could be seen trembling slightly in her hands. "Thank you for waiting." Linda entered the conference room. Behind her were WBC Accounting's senior partner and an economic crime investigator from the police. Surprisingly, several experts from another accounting firm were also present. "Thank you all for your valuable time," Linda's voice maintained its usual professional tone. However, her gaze held strong determination. "Today, I'd like to report on a serious issue concerning Prime Realty's accounting system." Multiple accounting data points were displayed on the conference room screen. A small murmur arose among the executives. "First, please look at these unusual fund movements," Linda pointed to the screen with a laser pointer. Over the past 6 months, more than $2 million in funds have been diverted outside the company in unexplainable ways. Michael's face turned pale. Jessica discreetly glanced toward the exit. "And these are records from the embezzlement case at WBC Accounting 3 years ago," new documents appeared on the screen. The perpetrator was about to escape prosecution due to the statute of limitations, but... Linda paused for a breath and looked at Jessica. "Ms. Morrison, your real name is Jessica Clark, isn't it?" The conference room fell dead silent. Jessica's expression hardened. "3 years ago, you worked in the accounting department at WBC Accounting. You were the primary suspect in a $5 million embezzlement case, but avoided prosecution through evidence destruction and sophisticated cover-ups." A commotion arose among the executives. Michael stared at Jessica in disbelief. "Afterward, you changed your name and continued embezzling funds from multiple companies using similar methods. Prime Realty was your 6th target." The screen displayed successive photos of Jessica's past. Though her hairstyles and makeup differed, she was unmistakably the same person. And then came the decisive evidence, her distinctive gesture captured by security cameras. The characteristic habit when handling documents was clearly recorded. Yesterday, police searched her residence. The economic crime investigator stepped forward. They discovered multiple forged passports, bank accounts opened under false names, and numerous luxury items purchased with embezzled funds. Jessica suddenly stood up. "This is all a misunderstanding." Her voice cracked slightly. "Michael, you believe me, don't you?" "Our love," Linda quietly interjected. "You repeatedly targeted married men, got close to them, and embezzled company funds. 5 men have been deceived by the same method, with their companies losing over $15 million in total." New evidence was displayed. Testimonies from men deceived by Jessica. The extent of damage to their companies. Everything was presented with clear evidence. Jessica's voice trembled. Suddenly, she grabbed her Birkin and rushed toward the exit. However, police officers were waiting outside the door. "Jessica Clark, you are under arrest for suspicion of fraud and embezzlement," the officer's voice solemnly echoed. Jessica seemed to give up all resistance, her shoulders slumping. Michael wore an expression as if he had returned from hell. "Linda, We'll talk later," Linda said calmly. "Right now, we need to focus on minimizing the company's damages." Prime Realty's president stood and bowed deeply. "Mrs. Wilson, thank you for your cooperation. We are deeply grateful for your swift action in protecting our company's reputation." Spring sunlight streamed through the conference room window. The maple's new leaves swayed in the wind, seeming to herald the arrival of a new season. Linda quietly began gathering her things. "The press conference preparations are complete," the PR representative announced. This case would undoubtedly become major news. However, Linda's heart was already heading home. It was nearly time to pick up Amy. She looked at Michael one last time. Her husband stood with slumped shoulders, wearing an expression of deep regret. 12 years of marriage. All of it was now taking on new meaning. "We'll talk about us another time," Linda said as she left the conference room with dignity. Reporters were already gathering in the hallway. However, her expression remained unwavering. This wasn't an ending, but a new beginning. As she stepped into the elevator, Linda let out a deep sigh. Her heart was a mixture of sadness and relief. But strongest of all was her determination to move forward. For her daughter. And for herself. 6 months later, as autumn arrived in Greenwich, Linda stood at her office window in the newly established Fraud Audit Division at WBC Accounting, gazing at the townscape. The maple leaves had turned red, and the evening sun was reflecting off the spire of First Presbyterian Church. "Mom, I finished my homework." Amy's voice rang out from the study space set up in a corner of the office. To balance work and childcare, Linda had secured a place for her daughter's after-school hours with the company's understanding. On the desk lay a math test with a perfect score, displayed proudly. "Well done," Linda said, stroking her daughter's hair while listening to the church bells. During Sunday's service, the pastor had preached about forgiveness. Those words still resonated in her heart. Michael had lost his position at Prime Realty. Though allowed to stay with the company in a demoted position as accountability for the damage caused, returning to his previous life would be difficult. However, he was desperately trying to regain trust. "Dad says he's working late again today," Amy said. "He says it's to pay back the company's debt." Linda nodded silently. Michael had taken on the obligation to repay the $2 million embezzled by Jessica. As the manager in charge, it was an unavoidable consequence. Last week, he had received permission to meet Amy for the first time. Father and daughter had an awkward reunion on a park bench. Amy was trying to forgive her father. A child's pure heart was beginning to melt away the complex emotions of adults. "Linda, here are the documents for tomorrow's meeting." Jennifer came in with papers. On the desk lay the final draft of the Fraud Prevention Guidelines. Since the Jessica incident, WBC Accounting had strengthened its corporate fraud prevention division. Linda had become a central figure in this effort. "Will you accept the Wall Street Journal interview?" the PR representative asked. Her reputation as a corporate crime prevention expert was growing daily. "We'd love to have you speak as a role model for women in management." Linda smiled and shook her head. "I'll have to decline today. My daughter and I have piano recital practice." Amy looked up happily. They were scheduled to perform "Amazing Grace" together at next week's church recital. The hymn praising God's grace was also a symbol of their new life. In the early evening, mother and daughter stopped by Whole Foods Market. They gathered ingredients for their weekend pot roast tradition. At the checkout, Linda encountered a familiar face. "Oh, Mrs. Johnson." The Neighborhood Women's Association president greeted them with a warm smile. "Last week's sermon really touched my heart. Especially the part about forgiveness." Linda nodded quietly. Jessica's trial had concluded last month. A 7-year prison sentence. The 5 men who had been victims of her methods were each trying to rebuild their lives. "Hey, Mom," Amy said, looking up at the sky on their way home. "We'll be happy, won't we?" Linda squeezed her daughter's small hand. "Yes, we're already happy." When they arrived home, there was a package on the porch. It was from Michael's mother. Opening it, they found a photo album from Amy's early childhood. It contained photos of the family's happy times. Not denying the past, but accepting it. And building a new future. Linda stood in the kitchen and began preparing dinner. The sound of Amy practicing piano echoed throughout the house. On the entrance table sat a new family photo of Amy and Linda. Just mother and daughter. But there was genuine happiness captured in it. Outside the window, the maple's autumn leaves gleamed in the sunset, as if announcing the arrival of a new season.